All right, so now we are recording. So, as I was saying, can everyone see and hear me? Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, thank you. So when we flow, we want to flow vertically, and what that means is you have your A4 paper. We don't want to flow this way. Like, you don't want to like write this way, because then like let's say their next speech is a rebuttal against what you just said, then you have like nowhere to put it other than below, and it's like unclear which argument it's going against, right? So you want to flow vertically, like downwards, and generally you want to put your paper like vertically as well. So you don't want your paper horizontally either, because since we're flowing vertically, then you'll have like a bunch of columns just for one speech, which is hard again. So we generally want to a good way to like know how to split your paper is probably fold it in 4 bits, because you know there's going to be 4 speeches on each side, right? Or you can not fold it. Like, I never fold my paper. I just try to keep your like flowing when you're flowing in a column. Like, don't make it too wide, like half the paper. You want to like make it small enough so that you can fit all the other speeches in the round, right? And generally when you flow, you want to like flow as small as you can, where to the point where you can still see it easily, but you don't want to like have it very spaced out, because they might have like 3 contentions, and then you're flowing and you're like all the way here at their second contention, so then you might need to start another column, right? We generally want to keep all their arguments in the same column. And then when we flow, we want to flow obviously like the contention names, and then like, you know, contention 1 and like the tagline, which probably like, I don't know, like accessibility, right? And then you want the card names and the dates. So it might be kind of hard to have like every single, like, you know, obviously you're not going to flow every single piece of evidence, but if you hear like key pieces of evidence, for example, like their impact evidence, like 10 million people will die, you probably want to flow that. Or if you hear something that sounds like very sus, right? Like they're like, oh, like if the US were to implement this kind of price control, we'd go to a nuke war. And that's what their evidence says. Like, that's pretty sketchy. So you probably also want to write down the card name and then the date, to make sure like that you can ask for the evidence later. And they're probably lying about it. And then for this drill specifically, you want to flow as detailed as possible. So you're trying to get down all the details, and you don't have to like flow word for word, but what you do want to do is like flow all the link chain and like the evidence names, right? And then when we're flowing, obviously you cannot flow at the speed of like someone speaking. So we always want to use shorthands. So for example, like if they say like the economy will go down once we implement price controls, you know, I might use PCs for price controls, right? Because I know this topic is about price controls. So I'm just going to use PCs every time I hear price controls, and then like a down arrow perhaps. And then I write like econ, like ECON. So price controls decrease the economy, right? So you want the contention names, the taglines, and then the links and the impact. So that's the very minimum that you need, right? Like, so the contention name, what their link is, like you might just write profits go down means innovation down, and then the impact, which is like 10 million people die, right? So at the least, that's the very least you have to do, but generally the more detailed we can get, the better it is. So here's an example of my flow. You can't see the bottom of the page because I don't know why, but Google like clips it out, but you can see my paper is vertical. And this is an actual round I have, right? And at the top, I label which speech it is. And always make sure you're flowing in 2 different colors. It doesn't really matter which color you use for which side. But for me, I just, like, whenever I'm flowing neg, I always use a blue pen to flow neg. And then for af, I always flow in red. But my, like, a lot of my friends say they actually flow the other way around, like af is bad, so they want red is bad, and then blue is just neutral, so that's af. But I don't know, they like, you can choose whatever colors you want, just make sure that you can tell the difference, right? If you choose like pink and red, it's like pretty hard to know what you said versus what they said. But with this, like, I know exactly what they said and I know exactly what I said. So in this case, Mount Sai was neg, so you can see my flow. So at the top, I like to label which speech it is, right? 1N is just like the constructive. 2AR is just the rebuttal, the R. S is summary. and then AS is AF summary, right? And this is neg summary. And then NF is neg final focus. AF is AF final focus. So we have constructive, the rebuttal, the summary, and then the final focus is. And then on this sheet, we have a little bit more. It's just 2 rebuttals, 2 summaries, and 2 final focuses, whereas this one only has 1. But that's because Mount Sinai spoke first, so that's why you have 1 less speech on 1 paper. But if we look to what I wrote, right, I have C1 means contention 1, Saudi Arabia wants to protect itself, okay, and then Air Force 2, Space Force, right? Like none of this might make sense to you, but to me, like I know exactly what I was writing, right? Like Air Force materials go to Space Force because the Space Force is taking it away. And then I write like AF as a shorthand for Air Force, right? And then right here, what I like to do is I like to write the card name like Switzer and then the year 20. And then I put like a bracket around it to make it clear that it's a card name, not like part of the argument, right? So a bracket here as well, and then a bracket there. And then this, our opponents had 2 links into their impact, right? So the first was less confidence, and then the second was like adversaries. And then they had 2 impacts as well, so I also numbered those. So one is proliferation, so I just wrote prolif, and the second one is like Iran missiles, which kill a bunch of people, and also terrorists. And then we have the rest, right? So you can see it's very detailed. Like even if I don't, you know, like it's been a week since I've done this debate, but I like just by looking at this, I still remember what their case is, right? So you always want to have a good flow. And you might be wondering, okay, why is this side so empty then, Nicole? Right? This was my own case. You don't necessarily have to flow your own case that well. Like you just have to write the major links and then the contention name so that you can flow something next to it, right? And if we look at the neg rebuttal flow, I flowed their rebuttal against my case. You can see it's very detailed, right? Like I write the card name for each one. And then some of them I even like label what it is, right? This is a D-link. This is a turn. That's a turn. This is a turn. That's a turn. This is just a normal card, right? And so by doing so, not only does it like help me understand their argument better, but like sometimes your opponents will like say you can turn their argument, so you kind of like know, so you can write a T beforehand. But labeling it helps, so when you are going back through this, you know exactly what you need to respond to and what kind of argument it is, right? So it's like pretty detailed here. Yeah, so just try to like get as close to like the amount of detail that you kind of see on this page in your flow as well. And I'm not gonna like do a whole rebuttal. What I want you to do is flow like I flow the case, right? So if I have 2 links in this case that I'm going to read, please flow, like number the links, right? So is anyone confused about flowing? Okay, then please take out 1 piece of paper because you only need to flow 1 side in 1 case. Make sure to put it vertically, and 1 color pen is fine because I'm only reading 1 side and I'm not going to read both sides. So a lot of the time you'll also encounter that like you might not understand exactly what your opponents are saying, right? Like they might be reading some super mysterious argument that you've never heard of before, but what you always want to make sure is even if you're confused, you still want to put down on the paper whatever they said, because while you might be confused when they say like electromagnetic spectrum disruption, signal jamming, like as long as you can write the words down during crossfire, you can ask them questions about it. You can clarify it later. But if you have like nothing on your paper down, you didn't understand their argument, you forgot what they said, then you'll have no way of like responding to them, right? So it's always really important to have a good flow. So is everyone ready with like a piece of paper and a pen? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. So all right, then I will read at like, I'll just read at like my normal pace, right? It won't be too fast, but it's not that slow. So, all right, my time begins now. Interlink negates the resolution. On balance, the benefits of creating the U.S. Space Force outweigh the harms. Contention 1 is the price tag. Elliott 21 finds America is addicted to military overspending, throwing $13 trillion at the Pentagon in 2 decades. The Space Force is no exception, as Pope 20 quantifies, with its budget doubling in 2020, it's now proposing a $169 billion increase for 2021. Tybee 19 writes, the DoD's bottomless pit of money always yields wasteful results. Worse, Thompson finds Space Force just replicates everything the Air Force Space Command did anyways, adding no unique value for a higher price tag and becoming a liability in two ways. First is politicization. Space Force's creation was rooted in political interest, not national security. McMillan 21 writes, the Trump administration used it as a token to buy political capital with private defense contractors, which Biden also cashes in on. Negan 21 furthers that this creates a lock-in effect where defense contractors lobby for funding increases in new branches even during peace. Warhawks in Congress push for conflict, and the same contractors reap the financial benefit. The Scientific American quantifies that as a result, taxpayers have lost $67 billion. Second is replication. Thompson 18 writes that the Space Force replicates capabilities elsewhere as it receives functions that continue to exist in other services. For instance, the Air Force isn't giving up its cyber capabilities, so it mirrors organizations and competes for scarce technical talent, creating a wasteful redundancy and sprawling yet another bureaucracy. As a result, the Space Force is detracted from critical programs. Kunstler 20 finds, while defense spending has already detracted money from housing, food, education, and medical investment, the Space Force will cut deeper. While splurging on the elaborate and expensive Space Force, the government had otherwise slashed funding in health agencies and infrastructure. The impact has already been felt, as Young 20 finds the underfunding of the public health leads to weak infrastructure unprepared for a crisis and neutered the U.S. healthcare's ability to handle COVID, leading to tens of thousands of excess deaths. All right. Did everyone get that down? Okay, so now please take a picture of your flow, or if you float on your computer. I'm sure everyone float on paper, but if you float on your computer, paste it in the chat. Float on paper, grab your phone and take a picture of it and post it in the Teams chat.
What if it's horrible?
It's okay. That's why we practice.
Okay. In the middle, my ink ran out.
Sorry, what did you say, Ethan? I can't hear you.
In the middle, my ink ran out.
That's okay. Post whatever y'all have. I mean, I don't expect y'all to be perfect, right? Y'all are middle schoolers. Once you become high schoolers, you're gonna be so good by the time you get there. Oh, I'm so ready. I'm so ready. I'll be these are the kids I taught, bro. Anyways, please post those in the chat so I can give y'all some feedback. And I'll just wait for that. All right. Let's see what we have in the chat. So first, America means spending money. Space War made a big budget. Space War will cost big money. Okay. All right. So outweigh harms. Elliot 21, addicted to spending. Budget increase. Adding no benefit. Two harms. Political interest. Enemies locked in effect. Lost 67 billion. Air Force not giving up technical. Detracted from programs. Infrastructure unprepared for crisis. And then Ethan's price tag, military spending, 169 mil, no unique value, yes, 67 billion, Air Force not give up cyber capabilities, Space Force cut deeper, weak infrastructure, US can't handle COVID, loss of thousands of deaths. Yeah, so good job for all of y'all. I think, William, it would be good if you could flow in a little bit more detail, the card names. I think Juliana probably did the best job here in flowing card names. And so in the case, right, as I was reading, I read, let's see, where do we go back? Okay, so as I was reading, I read, Thompson finds Space Force just replicates everything the Air Force Space Command did anyway, adding no unique value for a higher price tag and becoming a liability in 2 ways, right? So generally when you hear like 2 ways or like 3 ways, 4 ways, you know that they're like going to be links or there's going to be like 2 different arguments, right? So what we also want to do is not only like write it down, which a lot of you did, that was a good job. We also want to number them so it's clear when you're going back, like exactly which links are which. And you don't have to like read it super specifically to find where the link is, right, on your flow, because you're going to write a lot of words. And if you number it, it's easier to find what exactly you're looking for. And then I also said at the bottom, the impact has already been felt as Young 20 finds, blah, 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 right? So when you also hear like keywords like impact, the link, first, second, right, you can number them and you know exactly what you need to flow. And while Juliana, you did a good job writing that infrastructure was unprepared for the crisis, the most important thing that we want to flow is like the number of deaths or like the impact on humans, right? So if they say it leads to a nuke war, you can write nuke war, but you also probably want to write like whatever number they read afterwards, right? Like 100 million people will die. That's a pretty important number as well later on. So yeah, but everyone did a pretty good job. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. So
Wait, how many deaths did you say? I forgot.
I said tens of thousands. So like you could just write thousands. Right? Sometimes it's not like a super like 169 million, but you know, just depends kind of on the number they give. So can everyone see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's talk about offense versus defense. And this is a really important concept in a summary. So today we're talking about summary speeches, by the way. So for offense, it's things that can win you the round and they're reasons to vote for you, right? So basically, if you're on neg, let's say this price controls resolution, right? You would talk about the harms of the resolution, things that are bad. For example, price controls would mean the economy goes down. Price controls mean people die. Price controls means less innovation. That's a reason to vote for you, right? If you're on the AF, benefits of the resolution. Price controls save lives. Price controls make drugs cheaper. It benefits the economy, blah, blah, blah. Things that are good, right? And it basically consists of your case and then turns on their case. So basically, you know, all your contentions are things that are offense, right? They're reasons why the judge should vote for you. And turns on their case are also reasons the judge should vote for you. For example, if you turn their argument, like they say, oh, innovation will go down and innovation saves lives, but you're like, no, innovation actually goes up. Obviously, that's another reason to vote for you because you are also saving lives through innovation, right? So turns are also offense. But responses to their case do not count as offense, right? So if you're like, oh, judge, my opponents are wrong because like innovation doesn't actually go down, like innovation stays the same. First of all, that's not a reason to vote for you, right? Because if it stays the same, there's no like uniqueness, right? Like there's no reason to vote for them, but there's also no reason to vote for you off of that argument. It's just their argument is not true, right? So it's like less of a reason to vote for them. So that is exactly what defense is, right? It's reasons why your opponent's arguments aren't true or they're diminished, right? So it consists of delinks, non-uniques, impact mitigation, and like evidence indicts. And evidence indict is just like roasting their evidence, saying it's false, right? So like delinks are not a reason why the judge should vote for you, right? Like sure, their argument might be false, but you still have to give me something on your side that's a benefit of price controls for me to vote for you. Does anyone have like any questions on offense versus defense? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Unless somebody does. All right, so let's practice. Is it offense or defense? So the first one, my opponents argue that they can solve climate change. However, they're actually making the problem worse because nuclear energy produces more carbon emissions per ton as compared to solar panels. Is this offense or is this defense?
Defense.
Okay, somebody said defense.
Offense?
Okay, Juliana said offense. Anyone else? A tiebreaker, maybe? Okay, so as we talked about before, right? What consists of offense? Turns on their case and your contention. Now this says
defense. I don't know.
So you also think it's defense, right? So what's offense? Offense is turns on their case and your own contention. Defense is reasons why their argument is not true. So right here it says, my opponents argue they can solve climate change, but they actually make it worse, right? That's like the key word. They're making it worse. So that's a reason to vote against your opponents, because it's basically a turn on their case, right? If they say they can save lives, but they actually kill more people, that's a reason not to vote for them. Does that make sense? So just because you're responding to them, it doesn't mean that it's automatically defense, right? All turns are offense. If their argument produces some harm that we don't want, that is a reason to vote for you, because then in your world, you're not killing this extra like 10 people. Does that make sense?
So that's offense, right?
Yeah, it is offense. Okay, so let's do the second one. My opponents say they can save lives through preventing a nuclear war. However, a nuclear war would never happen because mutually assured destruction means that countries don't want to send nukes and kill each other, because then everyone will die. Is this offense or is this defense?
Defense.
Defense.
Okay, yeah, that's right. So it's defense, because anything that like non-unique delinks their case is defense, right? This isn't a reason to vote for you. It's just like, okay, they don't win their argument, right? Like they're talking about a nuclear war, but you're saying a nuclear war won't happen. That doesn't mean that there's a reason for me to vote for you. Like, what is that a benefit of the resolution? No, it just means that your opponents aren't right, right? So you're not preventing a nuclear war, and they're also not causing a nuclear war. So we're like back at the baseline. So this is defense, exactly. All right. Third, you should vote for us because when we implement price controls, drug prices will decrease and millions more Americans can afford them, saving lives. Is this offense or defense?
Offense. Offense.
Yeah, it's offense, right? This is basically kind of your case, right? Because a lot of AFs will argue, oh, when we implement price controls, drug prices decrease and millions more Americans can be saved, saving lives, right? So this is kind of like contention, your case, and it's a reason to vote for you, right? Because you're saving lives. All right, number 4. My opponents are lying, Judge. Their evidence doesn't even say what it says. Say what they say it says. That's what I meant. Is this offense or defense?
I mean, well, I think that's, wait, hold up.
Defense?
Someone said defense?
Yeah, I think it's defense.
Okay.
Yeah, it's defense.
Yes, exactly. Evidence indicts are defense. Unless you bring in like a moral argument, like, oh my God, Judge, you shouldn't vote for people who are lying. And then like you extrapolate it into like, we should have like honesty and debate. But generally, no one will do that. You just like prove that their evidence doesn't say what it says. That's just defense, because that means their argument is false, but it's still not a reason to vote for you. Right, so good. We got like 3 out of 4, 75%. That's a C. I'm kidding. Okay, let me grab my computer charger. I'll be right back. All right, now we are charging. Wonderful. All right. Okay, so next. All right, so what is a summary? So today we're talking about summary speeches, remember. So a summary is 3 minutes long, and it's a speech summing up basically the entire debate thus far. So you already have 2 constructives, a crossfire, another 2 rebuttals, and then another crossfire. So that's like, each constructive is 4 minutes. That's 8 minutes plus 3-minute crossfire. That's 11 minutes plus the same for the rebuttals and the crossfire. So that's 22 minutes that you have to sum up in 3-minute speech, right? So summary is pretty important. So that's why we did a flowing drill in the beginning, right? Because you need a good flow in order to have a good summary, because you have to summarize like everything that came up. But if you don't know what came up and if you don't remember, then there's no way for you to do a good summary. So in a summary, you must extend offense and defense, right? So you want to extend reasons for the judge to vote for you, but you also want to extend reasons why your opponents don't win their argument, right? So, but at the very least, offense, right? So even if you don't extend defense, the most important thing to spend time on is giving your judge reason to vote for you. Because even if, let's say, you destroy their whole case, there's no reason to vote for your opponents. But if you didn't extend offense, there's also no reason to vote for you. So then the judge is like, okay, who am I supposed to vote for, right? Like probably your opponents, because they have this marginal chance of maybe winning their impact versus like you, who don't even have an impact or contention, right? So if it's 3 minutes long, you might be wondering, okay, so how much time should I spend on offense and how much time should I spend on defense? Or like my case, their case, right? Because generally all the offense is usually generated on your case, and then there's defense is usually on their case. So generally you can split it 1:30, 1 minute and 30 seconds per side. So you can spend 1:30 on your case, 1:30 on their case. Or you can spend 2 minutes on your case, 1 minute on their case, or 1 minute on your case and 2 minutes their case, right? It can really vary, but you probably don't want to spend less than 30 seconds on your case, right? Because you generally want to spend as like more time on your case as compared to their case. So I probably recommend like 1:30 per side, or 2 minutes your case, 1 minute their case, because it's very important for you to have offense even if you don't have defense. And in this case, signposting is key, because let's say you have, and what I mean by signposting is like telling the judge where you are on the flow or which argument you're talking about, right? So let's say if I just start off like, oh, judge, my Hannah tells you in rebuttal that like price controls actually don't decrease innovation because blah, 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 right? Like your judge doesn't know which argument you're talking about. They have your case and they have your opponent's case. Like maybe you have 3 contentions, your opponents have 3 contentions. If you don't signpost, they don't know which side you're starting on, your case or their case. And they also don't know which contention you're going on, right? So that's why we need to be like, okay, judge, starting off on my case, on my first contention, this is the first way you can vote for me, blah, 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 right? Or if you want to start on their case, judge, starting off on their second contention about like innovation, we would tell you that blah, 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 right? So you always want to signpost. And then when you move on to the next argument, you want to signpost as well, right? So like, oh, or perhaps like within the impact of the argument. So like on their impact specifically, blah, blah, blah. Or like, okay, now that we've like, okay, let's go to my case, right? So after you're done with their case, okay, now that we've like destroyed their case, let's go to my case and my second contention, which is the reason why we're winning this round today. So it's really important to tell your judge exactly what argument you're talking about. Does anyone have like any questions on the stuff I just talked about?
What's extending?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about that next. So, but does anyone have like any questions other than that? Okay, so a summary. Oh, sorry, did someone have a question? Okay. No. Okay. So a summary speech comes in 4. Like we know there's 4 speeches, right? Constructive, rebuttal, summary, and then final focus. So everything you want to say in your final focus speech needs to be in your summary speech already, right? So you can't just bring up like new arguments in final focus. That would be kind of mean to your opponents, because then they have to like, you know, respond to a whole entire new contention in final focus. That's why there's usually the rule is nothing new in like second, summary, and final focus. So now let's talk about extensions, right? So extensions just means that you have to say it in your summary. So like when I say like extend offense and defense, I mean that you must bring the argument from like rebuttal or summary or constructive and bring it into the summary. So that's what you call extend, right? Because you extend the argument from constructive or from rebuttal into your summary. So how do you extend offense, right? You have to make sure to collapse. We will talk about that later, but that just means like choosing one or a couple of arguments to focus on, right? Because you might have like 3 contentions and you won't have time because you took 4 minutes to talk about your 3 contentions. And now you only have a 3-minute summary, and you not only have to go over your case, but you also have to go over their case. So that's why we generally want to pick like 1 or 2 arguments to go for. And when you're extending your offense, which generally is your case, right? You want to extend at least the link and the impact. So you have to explain, you have to like basically restate your argument again. Like you can't just be like, oh, judge, extend my contention 1 and then move on, right? Like you have to tell your judge what contention 1 is again. You have to be like price controls, increased accessibility, which means more people are saved, right? Things like that. And then you also want to weigh. So we're talking, we're going to talk about the individual parts later. But then how do we extend defense, right? You want to signpost wherever their case is, like judge on my opponent's second contention on the impact specifically, and then you extend whatever response it is. So basically you just repeat whatever your partner said in like their rebuttal, right? Like let's say your partner said against the impact, nuke war doesn't happen, right? So judge, you can extend my partner's response that nuke war doesn't happen because of mutually assured destruction, right? So you just have to restate. So summary is kind of like restating the important arguments in the round and like choosing a key few ones. That's what's hard about summary. So let's look at like an extension specifically, okay? So here's the price tag contention that I just read to you, right? I told you the Space Force is spending so much money. There's two links. First is politicization and second is replication. And then the impact is that like there's less money on like social spending like welfare, housing, food, education, which leads to tens of thousands of excess deaths, right? So this was about like, I'd say like 400 words maybe. I forget the exact number, but this was a lot of words, right?
Wait, I have one more question. So for extending, how do you know like which contentions to extend? Like no, like not exactly like that, but because like let's say like you had a really important contention and your opponent sees that as well, and so they try to like rebut it, right? Then if they have already rebutted it, do you still extend it or do you just kind of let it go?
Yeah, we'll also talk about that later, but the short answer would be it depends how important it is, and you still have to frontline. So generally, like, don't be scared if they refuted it. You can still go for it anyways. Okay, so let's look at the extension example, right? So I just talked about price tags, and that like contention was 400 words. But when we extend it in summary, look, I already wrote this. This was like 80 words, right? Contention 1, price tag. Pope 20 quantifies the Space Force's budget doubled in 2020 and will continue to increase by hundreds of billions in the future. Whereas Thompson finds the Space Force just replicates everything this Air Force Space Command did, adding no unique value for a higher price tag and becoming a liability. As a result, Kunster 20 finds defense spending takes billions from housing, education, and medical investment budgets, underfunding our healthcare system, and leading to tens of thousands of excess deaths, right? So I condensed that whole argument into a very short thing, right? And you can have pre-written extensions. And like the reason why we want to have this is because you really have a short, like 3 minutes is really a short amount of time to talk about everything that already went on, right? So that's why if you pre-write your extensions, not only can you like say it faster, but you also don't have to like think of it on the spot, right? So then you can just kind of like read it off your computer. So as we can see, when you extend, you want to have at least the link in the impact, which is what I said, right? I said Space Force just replicates everything the Air Force, adding no unique value for a higher price tag. So the link is basically that like the Space Force is expensive, right? And then the impact is defense spending takes billions from blah, 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 leading to tens of thousands of deaths, right? So at the very least, you would have to read contention 1 is price tag, the Space Force is expensive, and this defense spending takes billions out of welfare, which leads to tens of thousands of excess deaths. That's like the least you need to say. But generally, we also want to include uniqueness, which is why this is unique to your side and why it's going to continue to happen, right? Because someone might say, okay, like the Space Force might take out of the budget, but it's like 0.2% of like the total defense budget. So how big of a problem is the Space Force, right? And then the uniqueness tells you its budget doubled already and it's going to increase hundreds of billions in the future. Right. So if the budget keeps increasing, obviously more and more people will die as it becomes a bigger share of our defense spending. Right. So that's the uniqueness and then the link and the impact. Does anyone have any questions on this extension? Okay. Yeah. So basically, in summary, when you're extending your own case, you want to restate your argument. And it's just like the rules of debate, but also, you know, for lay judges, like parent judges, it's especially good because sometimes they forget. So let's talk about collapsing, right? Collapsing, as we talked about before, is choosing the like 1 or 2 arguments that are most important on your side. So you might like wonder like, okay, so how am I supposed to know which ones are the best or which ones I should, you know, go for? There's a couple different ways you can do, and there's a couple different strategies. The first one you can do is like the least covered, right? Let's say they spent like 3 minutes on your first contention and only 1 minute on your second contention. It's probably going to be a lot easier for you to like refute whatever they said in that 1 minute and then go for that argument. So the least covered, right? Or let's say they just only have like one response against it. You can be like, Judge, they have like one response against it, which was like completely false, but you just, and that's why you should vote for our argument, and then you extend the argument, right? So least covered. Second is least time, right? Some contentions are like 400 words long. Some contentions are like 100 words long. Some are easier to like explain in a shorter time. So the one that takes you the least time can also be a good strategy, because if you have like, if you spend less time trying to extend your case, you have more time to actually like argue about their case or argue about different things, right? The easiest to understand or explain, right? This is one that you would probably use with lay judges, because some people like price tag, pretty simple, right? Like, we spend so much on the military, it's taking out of our welfare. That's pretty straightforward for lay judges. But like some arguments are like, oh, the Space Force like angers our adversaries, and our adversaries get scared, and then they start building up their militaries, and then there's miscalculation, which leads to a space war, and then the space war causes a nuclear war, right? That may be kind of hard to understand and also kind of long to explain to a lay judge again in your summary. So you might want to go for instead price tag, which is a lot easier to explain. And some judges, like, you can tell on their faces when you're in person, like they just like shake their head when they don't like your argument, or they're like, they look confused, right? If like you see those warning signs, it's probably a good idea to go for whatever they aren't confused about. Okay, and then the last one is the biggest impact, right? Some people run like extinction impacts, right? Like, oh, a nuclear war will cause like extinction on the whole world, right? Like if you have that big of an impact, it's probably like if you go for it, it can probably win you the round, right? Because like who knows if they're also running extinction. Even if they have 100 million people on their side, everyone dies in your contention, right? So these are some of the ways that you can decide. This is obviously not all of the ways, but it really depends on the round specifically what happened, and then also on your like personal preference, because sometimes I might go for like when it's my first tournament on the topic, or when it's my first round on the topic, I might just go for whatever contention I understand the best, right? Whatever I know how to explain. Like if there's some really weird argument that I don't even understand myself, it's probably gonna be hard for me to defend it and also explain it to the judge, right? So I also might go for whatever I feel like I understand really well. Does anyone have any questions on this? Okay, it's probably a no. So next, let's talk about front lines. So what is frontlining? So obviously in rebuttal, they're gonna attack your case, and they're gonna defend their own case, right? So if you're the first speaking team, your rebuttal person didn't get a chance to frontline your case, right? Because it went you're constructive, your opponent's constructive, your rebuttal, which basically can only refute their case, and then their rebuttal, which defended their case but also went against your case. And now it's your turn to do summary. So you have like, if you're first summary, you have all these arguments they just read against you, right? They read like arguments and like dealings, rebuttals against your case. So if you're first summary, you really need to do a good job of frontlining, which is basically responding to their rebuttals on your case. So in short, frontlining. So you can frontline before or after your extensions, right? Like let's say they had like 10 responses to your contention one. You can first extend your contention one, like, oh, judge, the first way you can vote for us is on price tag, because we tell you the Space Force is so expensive, it takes out of welfare spending, which kills millions. Then let's look at what my opponent said on my case. First, they said blah, 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 right? And then you can frontline. Or you can frontline first. Judge, on my first contention, my opponents say that the Space Force doesn't actually cost a lot of money. However, they're false because it actually costs billions of money and only increases in the future. And then you respond to everything that they said, and then you go, and that's why you can vote for our contention, which tells you that because the Space Force is so expensive, millions of people are dying due to less money spent on welfare. Right, so you can frontline before or after extensions, but you cannot extend without frontlining. Like they go hand in hand, right? So let's say you like extend your case. You're like, oh, judge, the price tag extension, right? Like, let's just say I said it again, and then you skip like the 10 responses that they put on your case. You just like completely ignore it, and then you're like, on my second contention, right? The judge has a very low threshold of like voting for you, like it probably 0, right? Because you didn't even respond to anything that they said. So basically, you're kind of like agreeing with your opponent that everything they said is probably true, right? So you always want to frontline. So perhaps in these instances, frontlining first could be better. But it just depends on personal preference. Like I always do extensions first just because my extensions are pre-written. It's easier for me that way, but you don't have to do that. And when you're frontlining, grouping responses is really, really important, right? So they had like 4 minutes to attack your case, right? Or like 2 minutes to attack your case. And they put like 10 different responses on your contention one. You only have 3 minutes to extend your case, extend defense on your opponent's case, and also respond to what they said against your case. You have like no time to individually respond to like 10 of them unless you're gonna like speak at superhuman speed, right? That's why we want to group responses, because a lot of the time, especially when they're getting to like 10 or like 6 responses, you know, that number of responses, generally they're not really unique. What I mean by unique is they're not really different from each other, right? So they might like read 3 different things like, oh, the Space Force is not expensive. The Space Force's budget is not that big. The Pentagon has a bigger budget than the Space Force, right? Those 3 things are basically the same argument. It's that the Space Force doesn't have a big budget, right? And you can group those and then you can respond to it. So grouping is like a faster way of responding. And then, so we talked about collapsing, right? You have to choose a couple arguments that you want to go for. But even if you don't extend an argument, you still have to address turns on the argument, right? So let's say you have 3 contentions, you decide to only go for the second one. That does not mean you can just like ignore everything your opponent said on your contention 1 and your contention 3 and just extend your contention 2 and frontline it. You also have to address turns on your first and third contention, right? So if they turn their argument, as we talked about, turns is offense, right? So if you like ignore their turns, that's a reason the judge might vote for them. So if you're talking about like, we can save billions of lives with this medicine, and they turn it, they're like, no, we're the ones saving billions of lives, and then you don't respond to that, your opponents might just win off of that turn, right? So you have to address turns, even if you're not going for the argument. That being said, some turns are like fake turns. Like some people label it incorrectly, right? They're like, judge, turn their argument for us because actually their impact doesn't happen because of XYZ, right? That's a dealing, that's not a turn. But sometimes they just label it as a turn, but that's not a turn, right? So let's say you're really short on time, you don't necessarily have to respond to fake turns because like your judge probably understands it's not a turn, or like they probably won't extend it, right? Because your opponents also have to extend defense, right? And you can maybe predict what they're going to extend. So let's say they might not extend like a fake turn. Or if it's a lay judge, right? Lay judges generally like don't care if you respond now or if you respond like in final focus. So if you're really running short on time, you don't really have to address turns, but it's always better practice to do so than to not. Does anyone have any questions?
No.
All right, so that's frontlining, right? Okay, and then last is weighing. So generally, if we have like, so let's say you have to do summary, right? You might be wondering, what are the steps to a summary? The first step, extend offense. Okay, extend your case. Actually, the first step would be to determine what to collapse. And then you got to extend your contentions, frontline, and then go on their case and extend defense. The last thing to do is weighing. So I'll just keep this here, but now let's talk about weighing, right? So why is weighing important? It's because it's like the easiest way to win you the round, right? Like really, you can take 10 seconds of your time and it could potentially win you the entire round, right? Let's say that they might have bigger numbers than you, right? They might have like 10 million people dying on their side, and then you only have 1 million, right? So even if you win your argument and they win their argument, your judge is like, okay, but they have bigger numbers, so I should probably vote for them, right? That's where weighing comes in. You have to compare your arguments and say, sure, they might have bigger numbers, But what's important is like the probability of it happening, right? Like their probability is so low, you're not even going to consider their argument, whereas mine is very high. So mine comes first. Right, so when you do this kind of weighing and like comparing arguments against each other, it really gives the judge a better idea of how they should be signing their ballot. What's the most important thing to look at first, right? Because when you don't weigh, what the judge has is a lot of arguments and no way to decide who to vote for, right? Like let's say you have 3 contentions, they have 3 contentions, like all of it's coming through. Okay, so you win 3 things, they win 3 things. How is the judge going to weigh, right? You have to tell them, even if it's something as simple as I have 40 billion lives and they only have 10 million, like obviously I win, right? Even something as simple as that, like you might think, oh, the judge probably knows, right? But it's not that obvious when you have so many things that you're talking about and you're not putting an emphasis on it. So even like things like my number is bigger than theirs really helps, like especially parent judges, like know what to vote for. So there's 3 main different types of weighing. The first is magnitude, the second one is time frame, the third one is probability. So magnitude is all things like numbers, right? So the first is scope. It's like the number of people affected, which is like, oh, you only affect people in America, but I affect people across the entire world, especially in like China or something. I affect people in China and America, right? That's a bigger scope of people than you. So even if like, let's say they say 10 million people will die in America, but you say, okay, but 20 million people will fall into poverty across the world. Just not even in America, but like America and the rest of the world, right? So on scope, you're winning, even if they have people dying, you have like people in poverty or somehow impacted, right? So the scope is bigger. Next is magnitude, and this is just like pure numbers. So if you have the same impact, like let's say your impact is people dying, their impact is people dying, but you have like 50 billion while they have like 10 million, obviously you have the bigger number. That's magnitude weighing, right? Pretty simple. Third is severity under magnitude, right? So this is like how bad it is. So you might say, oh, 10 million people die, and they say like 10 million people become like depressed because they don't have access to healthcare or something, right? The severity of it, right? Probably people dying is like more severe than like people getting depression, right? Because, you know, when you have like people dead, like it's really hard to reverse it, right? Like you can't pick someone out of the grave. Whereas they, like you could probably help someone cure depression later on. Because they're not necessarily dead as instantly as your impact, right? Or perhaps we can also talk about like, oh, my impact is people die, and your impact is like the economy, right? So obviously the severity of like people dying is probably more important than just like the economy, which always fluctuates and goes up and down. The next type of weighing is time frame. So it's based on time, right? So the first one is prereq. Actually, let's talk about long term versus short term first, right? So generally what judges default to if you don't tell them what to do is long-term weighing, right? So like you might say like, oh yeah, in the long run climate change is going to kill all of us, whereas they have like, yeah, there's going to be like a war on earth, right? So although theirs happens first, yours in the long term probably has like a bigger impact, right? Or let's say they're like, oh, in the short term terrorism increases, but you say in the long term the number of terrorists actually go down, right? So if we look at the long term impact, you should probably prefer us, because it's like a more holistic view of what actually happens. So generally judges default to long-term, and you can always argue for long-term, but you can also argue for short-term at the same time, right? And you can be like, oh, short-term impacts are more important because like they're more direct, or they come first. And the biggest way that you can weigh short-term against long-term is a prerequisite, right? Which basically is my argument happens before yours, and my argument needs to happen first before yours can happen, or when my argument happens, yours doesn't, right? So it's a prerequisite to your argument. So let's say, for example, one side says we will grow the economy by $1 billion, and the other side has like a war impact, right? And probably you can be like, oh, the war happens first. So if there's a war that happens, that means the economy goes down anyways, right? You can't have a good economy when you're in a war. So our war argument is a prerequisite to their impact, because you have to solve a war first before you can focus on like growing the economy, right? And you can also do vice versa, right? Like you need to have a good economy first in order to go to a war. So like if we can make the economy bad, that means we won't go to a war, which most people probably don't do it that way, but there is a way you can weigh, right? So on this topic, on this pharma topic, a way that you can weigh, especially for like innovation, you can be like, our innovation impact is a prerequisite to your accessibility impact. Because if no one even like invents the drug, there's no way that anyone can even buy it, even if it's cheap enough, right? So innovation is a prereq to like accessibility. Okay, and the last is probability. So the first is clarity of link, which is only like, it only works with tech judges. So don't use this on like a parent. And clarity of link is just basically how well you extended your case, right? So we talked about in like public forum, there's kind of these like, I mean, they're not like set rules. Nobody makes like a rule that says you must say everything you say in final focus must be in summary, right? But it is the general norm when we have tech judges, and some judges might write it in as their preference, right? Like everything you say in final focus must be said in summary, or you must extend the link, right? So basically, clarity of link is just how well you extended your arguments, right? Let's say your opponents, they only extended the impact. They're like, oh, judge, on our contention 10 million people die. You should vote for us there. And my opponents say blah, 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 but that's false, right? So maybe they frontlined it, but they only extended the impact. They didn't extend the link as to why 10 million people die. So you can be like, judge on clarity of link. Nobody says clarity of link, but you can say like, judge, just based on how they extended the argument alone, you can't vote for them because they didn't extend the link, right? So that's clarity of link. It's not just the link, like let's say they can extend the link, but no impact. That's also clarity of link. It's all called clarity of link, even though it's not like perhaps link, right? Okay, and next is like the inherent probability of something, right? So the inherent probability of like a war happening is probably much less than like the inherent probability that the economy will go up, right? Because like, it's probably a lot harder to make war happen than to make the economy get better. Or perhaps let's say like they're like, oh, if America gives money to like if America gives welfare to poor people, then these people can spend it on goods, and this good like it reinvests back into economy, right? Which creates new jobs. Okay. Or the alternative is the US government spends money, creates a new agency to create new jobs, right? The probability of the first one, like just the fact that an agency creates jobs, those jobs, like probably 100% probability, right? Versus like us giving money to poor people and then the poor people spending it, and then this spending somehow creates jobs, right? The probability of that is probably a lot lower. And then the last is debate probability, right? So this is like the way that you debate your argument. So let's say you have like 10 responses against their case and they didn't address any of it, and they don't have any responses to your case, right? So even if you're like running war and they're running the economy, you're winning on like debate probability because they don't have any responses to your case, but you have like 10 responses to their case. That's the reason the judge shouldn't vote for that, right? Or like sometimes the other thing can happen also where basically they have no responses to your case, which basically means it's like conceded, which basically means like they just let it pass through. They didn't say it's wrong, which means they agree with it. And basically that's 100% probability because they didn't say anything against it, right? And you're basically asserting the fact that it happens. And then on their side, you know, you might have like 10 responses. So their probability is very low. So does anyone have any questions on like weighing that we talked about? Okay. All right, so now let's go back to summary steps, right? So there's first summary and there's second summary, right? Like the first speaking team gets first summary, the second speaking team gets second summary. And when we talk about weighing, usually weighing actually doesn't go at the bottom. It goes after your case. So it would probably go after frontlining. It'd probably be the fourth step. Because like, let's say you extend one contention. You're like, so weighing, basically, you can't be like, oh, judge, their argument, you can only give them like 1% of their argument because I had like 10 responses. So 1% of their argument is like 1 million people. We have 10 million, we win, right? No, it's taking both arguments at their highest ground. So even if you completely buy my opponent's case, the reason why my case outweighs theirs is because our probability, is because of the magnitude, is because it prereqs their entire case, right? So weighing is taking both arguments at the highest ground and then telling the judge why this one argument can win you the entire round, right? So that's why it generally goes before defense. Because like you don't need defense, you don't need to have defense to win weighing and to win your argument. And then, but the other alternative is to finish responding to both cases and summing it up. And then at the bottom, you have weighing, right? And then you're like, even if you buy my opponent's case, this is why we still win the round. And you kind of like give a big picture idea of what the judge should vote on. So does anyone have questions? Okay. Well, I'll take that as a no. So last week I gave y'all some homework, which was to I gave y'all some homework, which was to write like some blocks and then finish your contentions if you didn't do that yet. So did anyone write blocks?
I wrote 3.
Okay, could you like share me the link to that document? So whoever's done it, can y'all share me the link to the document? Just in the chat. And then so I'm gonna post this like PowerPoint in the resources channel later for y'all. And actually I want to show you one more thing before we go today. How do I share my screen? Oh my god, I keep forgetting. Okay. Can y'all see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm in the files page right now, and if you go to this resources channel under files, there's a lot of different folders, and the one that we had today is going to be put in summary. There's already another summary one, but you can just look at the date and then you'll know, like, you know, what it was. But I want to point you guys to this big pictures idea. There's this weighing mechanisms, which gives the definitions for all the weighing, just in case y'all forgot. So yeah, it's right here. Okay. So y'all posted the links in the chat. So I will just give you guys feedback on that.